With less than a week to go till Election Day, party leaders are really ramping up their promises. We heard from the NDPs and Liberals over the weekend about their costed platforms, but Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's platform was released today. And here to break that down is political commentator Brian Lilley of the Toronto Sun. Brian, hello, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so Brian, what stood out most for you about Poilievre's platform, which was released Tuesday morning?
Let me start off by saying that I'm not a fan of fully costed platforms. These are documents that they became very trendy during the Chrétien years with, oh, look, I've got a plan, and John Chrétien waving around the red book, but I've never seen a government that actually follows through on them. But they give you an idea, I guess, of where the government wants to go. What I would say about Pierre Poilievre's platform release is that it's reasonable. It's responsible. I would call it holistic. It looks at economic growth. It looks at ways to find savings that are not going to gut public services that people rely upon. He adds in things that some people would be shocked at, such as a lot of supports for families dealing with children with special needs, things like that. But overall tries to look forward with economic growth, tries to say, look, here are the problems we've been dealing with in terms of a housing affordability crisis, in terms of slow economic growth, and here is how we are going to fix them. Um, Lots of spending on defense, savings in terms of cutting the tens of billions of dollars a year that we spend on consultants, and giving Canadians a tax cut so that we get to keep more of our own money. They're promising over several years a 15% tax cut on income tax. They're going to cut the GST on building new homes, things like that. And also, they're promising tax cuts if you invest in Canada. That's something Pierre Poilievre has been out with before. So, not a lot of new things in the platform release, but bringing together everything that he's been talking about, all the policies, and putting it forward. And unlike Mark Carney's plan, well, far more reasonable deficits and a path. He doesn't promise to balance the budget, but it's moving towards that.
Okay. And one issue Poilievre mentions is one that a lot of Albertans find important, and that is provincial autonomy. So what's Poilievre promising there?
He's not going to infringe on provincial jurisdiction, which is, it's funny when you talk about national unity. One of the things that really irritates Alberta and really irritates Quebec is when the federal government decides we know better. Sure, you guys run healthcare. Sure, you guys run education, but we know better and we're going to run the system for you. That just really irritates those two provinces in particular. Other provinces are less annoyed by it, but Alberta and Quebec in particular, very annoyed by this. So he promises to respect provincial autonomy when it comes to resource development, when it comes to how healthcare and education and things like that are run. He promises to scrap things like the electricity tax, which has become an annoyance to several provinces. So, it's a very different way of looking at things than the Liberals. The Liberals are viewed as, well, they're the party of national unity, except they're the party that normally exacerbates national unity because of these national programs. Look at childcare. Childcare is a provincial responsibility, and yet the feds go in there and they try and dictate terms, and they say you've got to do all these things. Then they don't fund it enough, and then the program starts faltering, as it has in Alberta, as it has in Ontario and every other province. And then the feds say, well, you're just not doing enough. Well, no, it's your program and you're not funding it. And now you're blaming us. These are the types of things that Poilievre says you'll get out of the way of. On childcare, by the way, this is something that Mark Carney and his Liberals keep saying. Well, if you elect Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, they're going to get rid of our childcare program. Poilievre has been clear in the past and in his platform. They will get out of the way of the provinces. And if you want to deliver it a certain way, deliver it that way, whether it's for profit, not for profit, home based childcare. Deliver it how you see fit, but make sure that families are looked after. That's a far better way than trying to say, no, 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 you can't have more than 20% of this style of childcare. No, Poilievre is saying, have the childcare that families need at a price they can afford. We'll fund you. You figure out the rest.
And now, you mentioned Carney's platform there projecting much larger deficits, and the Conservative plan projects smaller deficits. So, but how do the two plans compare outside of that?
Well, so in the first year, Mark Carney's Liberal platform would project a deficit of about 62 billion. Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives are predicting half of that. So one, they're going to spend less. Carney and the Liberals have projected far higher spending than the Conservatives. And they're also the Conservatives will try and find savings. Things like cutting the tens of billions of dollars that are spent by the federal government on consultants. Now, look, I spent decades living in Ottawa. Normally, what happens in Ottawa is, going back to the Paul Martin, Jean Chrétien years, they cut the civil service. They said, okay, we need to balance the budget. We're going to cut the civil service. And so people were laid off. A lot of those people were brought back in as consultants because the government still needs people to run. What the Trudeau Liberals have done, and what the Carney Liberals propose to keep doing, is to increase. So they have increased the size of the civil service by 30 to 40%, but they've also more than doubled the cost of consultants. So, you're paying tens of thousands of more bureaucrats, but also paying billions of dollars more to consultants who tell the bureaucrats what to do. Well, why are you paying both? So they're promising to find savings in that. They're promising to generate new revenues by dropping things like Bill C-69 and unleashing the resource revenue, getting rid of the emissions cap, again, unleashing resource revenue. All of these things that will, let the economy grow and take care of itself. A lot of people say, well, if the government's going to spend more, it's going to find savings, it's got to cut something. Let me tell you, I'll speak from the Ontario example because, as you know, I'm sitting here at Queen's Park, the Ontario legislature. For all the complaints that Doug Ford is not a conservative, he has increased spending every year. Absolutely. But he hasn't raised a tax once. Why? Because he's grown the economy. And that's what Poilievre is promising to do. There will be an increase in spending. Yes, there will be a decrease in the deficit. How do you do that? You grow the economy. It really is that simple.
Okay, and then we have the Liberals selling Mark Carney as this serious leader, an economist, but and he's calling for fiscal prudence. But doesn't this massive spending plan shoot a hole in that claim about Carney?
I couldn't believe when I was listening to Mark Carney's platform release over the weekend. I believe it was Saturday. He released his platform and he talked about how this was fiscal responsibility. This was prudence. And it's $130 billion in additional spending. So this is above and beyond. This is not, additional deficit. That's what it's going to be. Excuse me. Um, the Trudeau spending plan was not curtailed, which you would have expected based on Mark Carney's rhetoric up until Saturday. Instead, he's going to add 130 billion. There's going to be 250 billion in deficit spending over the next bunch of years. It is unbelievable that this is the direction that they're going to go. And yet they call it prudent. They call it fiscally responsible. It is neither of those. I've been pointing out for a while, just because someone has economists behind their name doesn't mean that they have good policies. And if you don't believe me or you think, well, you're just being partisan because Mark Carney's a liberal, look at someone like Peter Navarro, who is in Donald Trump's inner circle. Peter Navarro has an economics PhD from Harvard University. Peter Navarro, and I would say that a Harvard PhD in economics is equal to Mark Carney's PhD in economics from Oxford. These two universities are on the same level. Peter Navarro is advocating for Donald Trump to, push the tariff issue. This is the way to prosperity. So just because Peter Navarro has a PhD in economics doesn't make him immune from bad ideas. And the same would be true of Mark Carney. Lots of smart people have very bad policies or ideas. And I would say that Mark Carney falls into that camp when you look at his out of control spending. He's going far and above what Justin Trudeau projected and far and above what the parliamentary budget officer projected based on the Trudeau promises, which is higher than what Trudeau promised. He's just going to shoot right past them. And that is going to cause all kinds of problems for Canada.
Now, speaking of Carney, there you have accused him of lying many times in this election campaign, and of course that's a harsh accusation to make. But you just did it again over comments he made on Monday. So why are you saying Carney is lying?
So he was asked about why he's claiming that Pierre Poilievre is going to ban abortion in Canada.
Yeah.
Um, and the reporter that asked the question pointed out that Poilievre has said, "We're not going to do that." Oh, Carney said, "Well, it's not just an accusation; it's a fact." But it's not a fact. Poilievre stood on stage with him last week in Montreal at the leaders' debate and said he would not do that. That this has been Conservative Party policy for the last 20 plus years. That he wasn't going to do it. Why is he doing it? Because Poilievre says he will keep mass murderers in jail longer, and he'll use the notwithstanding clause to do it. So from that, Carney takes that he will ban abortion and use the notwithstanding clause. What's fascinating about this is that Carney, who puts himself forward as a very serious Catholic, had just finished talking about Pope Francis, who had passed, and we just got the news on Monday morning. So Carney's talking about the moral clarity of Pope Francis, how he learned from this great spiritual and religious leader. He talked about how he cited um, Pope Francis's writings on the economy and capitalism, on the environment in his own writings. And then he turned around and lied about Pierre Poilievre and his policies. I'm sorry, there's an older teaching that says you shall not bear false witness. And that's what Mark Carney did. He was bearing false witness about Pierre Poilievre and his policies. Carney has lied. And look, I know that's a harsh term, but when you are outright lying, you're not trying to just spin something in your favor. That's lying. And he lied about having nothing to do with moving Brookfield's headquarters from Toronto to New York. He lied about when he claimed that he helped Paul Martin balance the budget when the budget was balanced in 1998 and Carney didn't start working at the finance department until 2004. He lied when he said that you remember that big signing ceremony where he signed the document and said, "I've gotten rid of the carbon tax." The document that he signed in front of the cameras had no legal authority. It wasn't an order in council. It was make believe. He said that he wouldn't talk to Donald Trump until Donald Trump showed Canada some respect. And we find out later that on his first day, he reached out to try and call Donald Trump, and Trump wouldn't return his call for 2 weeks. He said Thunderstruck by AC/DC was the song he warmed up to as a goalie when that song didn't come out until 1990, long after Mark Carney stopped playing hockey at high school or university level. Like, there's so many things that this guy lies about. He's casual with the truth, to put it bluntly.
Oh my gosh. Let's talk about the NDP for a minute here. So Jagmeet Singh and the NDP keep fading into oblivion. They seem absent from the campaign, really. And you said that during the debates last week, Singh seemed focused on the wrong target. So why do you think he was focused on the Conservatives instead of the Liberals?
That was so puzzling to me and to so many other people because, look, early on, Pierre Poilievre had taken some of the NDP voters, especially blue collar workers who used to be with them. But really, they've been leaving the NDP for a long time because the NDP cares more about the faculty club than the union hall. They don't care about blue collar workers that, work in steel mills or in auto factories or anything like that anymore. They're worried about the downtown faculty club. But some of them had moved to the Conservatives. But lately, the NDP support has collapsed down to single digits. And almost all of it has gone to Mark Carney and the Liberals. And yet there he was, constantly interrupting Pierre Poilievre, attacking Pierre Poilievre. And I forget who it was, but someone in the parliamentary press gallery reached out to Singh's team and said, why? And they were told, well, it's because it's personal for him. He really doesn't like Pierre Poilievre. Well, look, are you interested in winning or just attacking someone you don't like personally? Because the other guy that you're not attacking as much is stealing your voters. You should be attacking him. No, Jagmeet Singh doesn't think that way. Look, I was just watching him before we started talking, and Jagmeet Singh's out in Vancouver, and he's talking about, well, make sure you don't just send liberals, send some of you Democrats so we can keep them honest. He's not even trying to win the election. He's not pretending. I mean, he probably shouldn't pretend at this point, but he's just saying, send you Democrats so that we can keep them honest. This is not a good strategy.
Yeah, I think he's actually come out and said like, look, I'm not running for PM anymore. Obviously, there's no way he can. Okay, let's talk about polls for a second here. A lot of people hate them. They say don't really put a lot of stock in them, but polls look like they've gotten closer, but most still have the Liberals leading. So are they close enough looking that the Conservatives could still win based on the polls?
Well, the Conservatives definitely have momentum right now. Whether you're talking Abacus Data, Leger, Ipsos, these are three of the big polling firms that are legit. There are others that have been all over the map that I don't put a lot of stock in. So the Conservatives have momentum right now. They're doing well, obviously, across the prairies where you are in Alberta. They're doing well in Saskatchewan. I think they will do well and hold on to, look, those 7 seats in Manitoba, very important. If they can hold those, that's great. And they're doing pretty well in British Columbia. So they're going to be competitive there, could win a bunch of seats. It's Ontario that matters right now. They're even doing well in Quebec, and could pick up a couple of seats. Atlantic Canada, that's probably not going to be great for them, but Ontario is what matters. They've closed the gap a bit. We'll see how this momentum goes over the next bunch of days, because if they can really pick up the momentum, they could close the gap. Looking at a minority, or if things go very well, it's an outside chance of a majority, but they could either win a minority themselves or hold the Liberals to a minority at this point. This is a battleground, and you know, Atlantic Canada is settled on the Liberals. The prairies have mostly settled on the Conservatives. BC and Ontario remain the battlegrounds. And right now, the Liberals still hold about a 6 to 7 point lead in Ontario. If they can close that and win in the right places, the Conservatives have a shot. Without that, they won't. Big rally in the suburbs of Toronto tonight. Big platform release here. Expect the Conservatives to spend most of the last week of the campaign trying to win votes in and around the Toronto, the GTA in Ontario, because if they can't do that, they can't win.
Oh, it'll be interesting to see what happens in a week's time here, won't it, Brian? Political commentator Brian Lilley of the Toronto Sun, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you.